Hi everyone, Colleen here, and welcome back to Got Balls. Today I'm going to talk about my road to diagnosis. Before we begin, I want you to know that there is no test for ALS. It is a very tedious process of elimination. I also want to let you know that last year was not a very good year for me, so um, we're basically going over some of these details here out of my memory and a couple of notes I scratched down. I do not have my full medical history here to tell you everything I was tested for, but we'll go over a lot of it here. Trying to do this as quickly as possible. It was a long journey. Also, I want to take a minute to thank my medical team for really being dedicated to me, listening to my concerns, and following through trying to find out the source of my symptoms. So, thank you. This all started about March 2019 with some slurred speech. I also had some headaches, not as bad as a migraine, but very dull headache for about 2 weeks. And I had some numbness, some tingling just in this one section of lip. And one day my speech was especially slurred, so I went to my PCP. My primary care provider told me to get myself to the hospital ASAP. So at that point, they did some blood work and a CT scan and told me I did not have a stroke. There were no aneurysms, nothing that indicated why I was going through this. So they had, at that point, diagnosed me with bALS palsy. A few weeks later, I followed up with a local neurologist who took a look and also determined that the muscle weakness here, also in my eyelid, only being on one side of my face with the slurred speech, bALS palsy, was what we were going with, and should be resolved within 3 to 6 months. However, I did not have the paralysis on that side of the face, nor any drooping. So I'm thinking maybe a mild case of bALS palsy should resolve itself. However, about 3 months into it, my speech was getting worse, progressively worse in my speech. Went back to the neurologist. We're doing some in-office things. Close my eyes, touch my nose, not happening over here. So another CT scan, see if there's anything residual in there, any changes since my first scan, and some blood work. Everything came back normal. So we're gonna sit tight a little bit longer, see if this resolves itself. In the meantime, my functions on my tongue were decreasing. I was starting to notice my inability to do my little tongue tricks. And a weird thing that was happening was summertime, I would have an icy cold drink or a popsicle in the middle of my tongue. The very middle of my tongue, I was not able to feel that sensation of cold. I could feel it on the sides of my tongue and my cheeks, but the middle of my tongue, I was not feeling it. Also, biting my tongue. I bit my tongue so many times during the summer. Also, I had a couple incidences where I was choking on myself, on my own throat. It felt like I was choking on my own throat. No food in my mouth at the time. I was still able to gasp for air, so it was a very, very frightening situation. Thankfully, I was able to resolve it, but very frightening indeed. Getting close to the 6-month mark, where my speech impairment was even worse. I was having some other issues at that time. Starting to drop some things, starting to have other issues, which my neurologist was able to identify possibly related to sleep. So I did change my sleep habit. Some of those things were resolved, but did not explain my speech. So there was some more blood work done, and this time an MRI to see if there was anything else that could explain this. Some of the notes I have written from this time frame include tests, standard blood tests, testing for things with my thyroid, some connective tissue diseases I was tested for, some basic autoimmune diseases, lupus, Lyme disease, muscular dystrophy. Everything came back negative. Blood work came back normal. So at this point, I'm very thankful that my neurologist sent me to a speech pathologist. During my first meeting with her, she was able to identify my tongue fasciculations, which was very concerning. And she also asked me to do a swallow test, which I failed in the office. So they scheduled the live x-ray of my swallowing, and then I was diagnosed with dysphagia. So my tongue issues, dysarthria with my speech, my dysphagia with my swallowing, my tongue fasciculations, together not a good combo. My speech pathologist gave me some really good exercises to do in the meantime. And at my neurologist's office, another doctor was called in to assess me. And at that point was the first time we discussed the bulbar ALS. But there were some other things we wanted to check, including an EMG and a nerve conduction study. So that took some time for me to get an appointment in the hospital for that. But at that time also, doing the test, close my eyes, touch my nose, I suddenly able to do that again. So this is a very interesting situation here. I have my nerve conduction study testing for various things. I have a few notes here for Guillain-Barré syndrome, multifocal motor neuropathy. Other neuropathies would have shown up, but my nerve conduction study and the EMG came back clear, except for my tongue fasciculation. So my local neurologist decided it would be best to refer me to a specialist for them to assess me up there. the specialist looked over my case, and we had some more blood work done. Here we are doing some very specific autoimmune diseases, checking for some other neuropathies, very specific cancers, muscular dystrophy, multiple sclerosis, Wilson's disease. There's a note in here I have written down. Myasthenia gravis was tested previously, but some different variations of that also came back negative. The doctor then did another nerve conduction and EMG again, and came up with basically we're looking at bulbar ALS. So one final test I had was adult onset Tay-Sachs disease. I dismissed it at first because traditionally it's known for people of Jewish descent, which I am not. But looking more deeply into that one, they're finding it more prevalent in the Irish and French Canadian descent, which I am. So that was kind of a plausible possibility, but that test also came back negative. So after all the testing, everything came back normal or negative. And by January of 2020, I was diagnosed with the bulbar onset ALS. So that is my road to diagnosis. So we will continue on with more videos explaining my condition, the exercises I'm doing to keep strong, some other things ahead. So if you'd like to keep track of my progress, please subscribe to my channel, and thank you for being a part of my journey.